I'm Megan Foy, the Institutional Relations and Strategic Partnerships Coordinator, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Dialogues, presented in partnership with the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. Dialogues offers panels, discussions, conversations, and provocative artistic discourse with leading artists, curators, and designers on current issues that engage them. We are about to hear from 3 of our 2025 Directors Summit cohort participants. Before that, I'd like to thank Heritage Auctions and Bloomberg Connects for their generous support of the 2025 Directors Summit. And to introduce our wonderful program partner, Jill Snyder, principal at Snyder Consultancy. There is live captioning available via the QR code at the front of the stage and 2 interpreters.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out today. And I'm really grateful to see so many interesting people in the community. And also I want to acknowledge those who have been part of the Directors Summit in the past who are coming back. It's a community and a family that has been formed. This is our 4th year. And I will say that never have these meetings been more important than now. And I think it's a real testament to EXPO Chicago that it provides a platform for such meaningful dialogue. So I want to thank my colleagues, Megan Foy and Kate Sears-Putowski, and of course, Tony Carmen for supporting this endeavor. So thank you. In today's discussions, panelists will present recent initiatives and share their perspectives and experiences reflecting the unique challenges and opportunities that museum leadership is facing in a moment of dramatic change. In a time of increasing polarization, cultural leaders have asserted the role of museums as open, civic hubs designed to heal past histories, protect against present threats, support the creative process, and engage communities in transformative life experiences. In our exchange to establish an overarching theme for this year's Directors Summit Roundtable, it was proposed to consider the museum as a living organism that serves to heal, protect, connect, and create. That said, even from the time that we began our conversations early this year, we have seen strengthened efforts in the United States to control cultural organizations through various measures, including executive orders, the withholding of funds, and to the shutting down of programs. These actions echo nationalist movements taking place in Europe. Increasingly, leadership faces an environment of volatility, uncertainty, chaos, and ambiguity. Following these presentations, I hope to explore these leadership challenges to the extent that we can and the role that museums can uniquely play in divisive times. Given the global reach of our panelists, I am eager to hear what parallels can be drawn between those working inside the United States and those outside. So let's begin with our presentations and introduction of our panelists. I'm going to introduce all 3, and then they are going to each give a 10-minute presentation, followed by moderated questions, and then we'll open it up to Q&A from the audience. So first, to my left is Guillaume Désanges. In 2022, Guillaume was named president of the Palais de Tokyo in Paris. He has worked at the Laboratoire d'Aubervilliers, yes, and founded the independent production structure work method and was guest curator at the Art Center Le Plateau, Frac-Île-de-France. Welcome, Guillaume. Stefanie Hessler on the end is the director of the Swiss Institute in New York. Her work centers artists and ideas through new commissions, transdisciplinary collaborations, and experimental formats. Welcome, Stefanie. And here in Chicago, Lara Caroline de Lara became interim director in 2020 and director of the DePaul Art Museum in January 2022, and having been the Associate Director and Collection and Exhibition Manager of the museum since 2016. So we're going to begin with Lara Caroline making her presentation.
Jill and the entire Expo team, thank you so much for having us and giving us this opportunity. Guillaume and Stefanie, it's truly an honor to share the stage with you this afternoon, so thank you. My name is Lara Caroline de Lara. I am the director of the DePaul Art Museum here in Chicago. We're a university art museum, part of DePaul University, with a mission to very specifically connect people through art and ideas. And with that, before we get into our full discussion about our initiative, I just want to take a minute to really focus on the prompt that we were given today, because I think it's important to recognize how big this challenge is for museums. To heal past histories, protect against present threats, support the creative process, and to engage communities in transformative life experiences. And I don't know about you, but even just thinking about that is exhausting, letting alone enacting it on a daily basis in a museum of our size, which is very small, with a mighty team. However, I will say that these conversations came to a head really in 2020, where museums are really having a reckoning of what it means to be held accountable for the way that we've been talking about art for such a long time. And with that, through those conversations, through beginning to think about this moment, which of course was during the pandemic, where budgets were being cut, staff at our museum, we at one point had one full-time staff member, which was yours truly, and really just having morale be really low in museums across the board. The automatic was to think about what you lack. And instead, we began to think about what it means to really begin to take account for the resources that we do have. And begin to think about the way that our museum interacts with our city and helps to support our city. And so with that, we began to think about what it means for a museum to become a good neighbor to the city that it lives in. Is it possible for an organization to be a good neighbor? One of the ways that I think about that is to sort of tend to your own garden first. So in going through our resources, we have an incredible history of social justice-focused exhibitions that are really rigorous in their content, but are also really thinking through those issues that not only affect our artists, but also affect our city. Climate change, immigration, women's rights, police brutality. We've held exhibitions in all of these topics and know that they are ones that hit home for Chicago audiences specifically. We also have a permanent collection that expands the art historical canon, very specifically highlighting those artists that often are left out of museum spaces, women artists, LGBTQ+ artists, artists of color, and specifically with a focus on Chicago. Those artists range from everyone from Caroline Kent, Brendan Fernandez, to Andy Warhol. We also have a very dedicated staff, board, and student employees. And while we are a small but mighty team with 3 full-time members, 1 part-time member, 12 students, we're doing a lot of incredible work and have staff that is ready to kind of meet the charge. In addition, our university community, we feel very honored to work for a university that shares our mission. Being a Catholic Vincentian university specifically, they also share a social justice mission with us. And then of course, in thinking about the things that we can share, we began to think about the deep relationships that we have with artists and other community members and organizations. Part of that includes an organization called the Stockyard Institute, based here in Chicago, run for the last 30 years by a teaching artist named Jim Degnan, who is here with us today. Jim has been running youth programs in some of the quietest quadrants of Chicago over the last 30 years and really bringing art as a way of, again, thinking through some of these really big issues. And then again, we also were thinking about the fact that 86% of community art participants want to continue to be involved in future projects in their own neighborhoods. So I'm beginning to think about what it means to be bringing people into our museum. These initiatives and these projects have a bigger impact outside of just our museum itself. Out of these conversations then came what we're calling the Learning Studio. This is very much a building an education program from scratch and thinking about the resources that we do have and beginning to build those resources into a museum education program that not only uses our exhibitions, our permanent collection, but also thinks about the ways that we very directly are enforcing our relationships across the city. So in working with Jim Degnan, we began to think about all of these different resources, the way that they fit together, the programs that can come out of them. And with this learning studio, we're thinking about hands-on multi-generational workshops. In the 2 years of benchmarking that we did do, that intergenerational exchange was a really key part of our programming and something that needed to happen because it wasn't currently happening throughout the city. Number two, we're thinking about curricula building for Chicago teachers directly based on DPM resources. So what does it look like to begin to build curricula directly with CPS schools based on our permanent collection, based on these big social justice issues? And then thinking about the museum as a center for interdisciplinary exchange, connection, and scholarship. I think a lot of times museum education programs are seen as kind of secondary to the rest of what the museum is doing, and for us it felt really important to think about this very scholarly aspect that we are bringing to it as well. Part of this also includes an Adopt a School program where we very specifically are working with a cohort of teaching artists from DePaul University that are acting as an advisory board for us. We are working one CPS school, working with one Chicago public school per year. So rather than having a single school come in, do one tour, go out the door, and that's the last time they see us, we instead are engaging with a single CPS art teacher and their students at a much deeper level throughout the year to begin to focus on a project very deeply. And with that, it is helping, again, to kind of build out that teacher's curricula based on the resources that we have. We are focusing on one student-led project per year. So as these students are coming in, they're building one particular project focused on the things about our city that get them excited, the things that they are worried about, and thinking about the relationship between our artworks and the topics that they engage and the way that we can link them to the students in our city. And then it's also about building an alumni cohort. So in thinking about the students that we have coming in, we want to keep that happening. So having, for instance, a high school in the Austin neighborhood then help to introduce elementary students from back of the yards to our collection, to the museum, so that they have a different sense of ownership over our museum, over our exhibitions and our collection, and are able to really speak to that for themselves. I want to leave you with a very short story which I feel really helps to kind of talk about the scale at which we're thinking about this. The Stockyard Institute that we have partnered with to do this work, Jim Degnan in 2002 was working with a student from the Austin neighborhood of Chicago. And Davion Matthews, which is the student's name, was really upset about the fact that so many people would talk about the Austin neighborhood, which is one of our most kind of neglected neighborhoods in Chicago, talk about it as an embarrassment and not want to come to the neighborhood. And they began to really have a conversation about what it meant to live in that area. And instead of focusing, again, on the lack, Davion and Jim then came up with the Austin Tourism Bureau, which meant that Davion and Jim bought a bus, sat in the Austin neighborhood every weekend for an entire month, and Davion wrote the script for giving the tour of the neighborhood, which meant this is where I go to elementary school, this is my favorite candy shop, and taking real pride in his neighborhood. They had one family that showed up. It was a grandmother and her two children that really were like, what is the point of this, and why are we here? By the end of that month, they had showed up every weekend, and the grandmother was beginning to add her own stories to it. And Jim was really like, you know, Davion, this wasn't terribly successful. We had one family that came for the whole time. And Davion said, Jim, we just changed the entire narrative for this family. And that's the kind of work that we're looking forward to doing at the DePaul Art Museum over the next years, is really thinking about how we are building our city one family at a time.
Thank you, Lara Caroline. Guillaume.
Thank you. So thank you for the invitation and thank you for EXPO Chicago. So I'm being president of Palais de Tokyo, appointed in 3 years ago in 22. And my first question when I applied at Palais de Tokyo was, what kind of institution do we need in those years? So it was a real thinking that I had, and one of the most important thing for me was to tackle or to take into account this ecological situation where we had. And this ecological situation became a kind of general economy of thinking and of managing this institution. And I called my project Institutional Permaculture, which I developed now in 3 years. And it takes permaculture, as you know, is a kind of a way of agriculture, reasonable and protecting and inspiring by the functionment of nature. I want to say also that Palais de Tokyo is a very urban institution in the very bourgeois area of Paris. So I don't do rural permaculture into this institution, but as a kind of ironical also thing, I really borrowed this permaculture spirit that I try to develop. So I will just make you a brief presentation of what I mean by institutional permaculture. First of all, permaculture is a holistic approach, meaning that taking into account ecology is not only making exhibition about forest or animals or nature, but it's really thinking everything in the institution, from communication to management, programming, of course, but also mediation and so on an ecological point of view. The second thing is about the necessities, which is an important thing to go back to what are the necessities of what we are doing. I think modernity has placed art in a kind of unnecessity thing, or a kind of l'art pour l'art idea of deconnecting it to functions. And I think it's very important to go back to function. It's not only like political or social function, but also it can be poetical or intellectual functions. And the last thing is the idea of the brain print versus the footprint, meaning that our footprint is very important. So we do a lot, like all museums do, about reducing our carbon print, but the brain print is also very important. Sometimes even more important. The brain print is the impact we have on the mentality. So not only how we do the thing, but what we are showing and what are the ideology at stake with what we are showing. From that, I developed this idea of institutional permaculture around 4 main ideas: ecosystem, zoning, local network, and biodiversity of forms. So the first is ecosystem, which is very simply how to consider your institution not alone, but part of an ecosystem in general. So taking into account what is done around you in your environment. It doesn't mean to work with in collaboration. It sometimes means the contrary, not to work with, but to be aware of what is missing in your area and do things that others don't do in your environment. The second main thing is about zoning. It's a very interesting concept of permaculture. When I talk about permaculture, I talk about agriculture permaculture. It's considering the use of space and time with a more reasonable aspect. For example, in the Palais de Tokyo, it's a very big area. It's 22,000 square meters, so it's a very big area, and you could imagine why such a big space, such a large space nowadays into Paris when there is a lot of other space that shows contemporary art. And I really thought about this permacultural thing, saying that there is no good scale for permaculture. You can do permaculture on a very small scale or a very big scale. Why? Because it's a question of what we are doing with your space. And then, for example, in Palais de Tokyo, I really thought of that place, the large place was not a spell, was not a bad thing. It depends on what you do with the space. Then I decided that we will use less space for exhibition, which are already very big, but we use the space for other things. And that's why we're creating La Zone, the zone, which is a new space of Palais de Tokyo, when you have a free space of, you can have a drink, you can work, you can also have a free exhibition there. You have, but you can use the space for other things than only paying your ticket to see exhibitions. And there is also a new space for mediation, especially on mental health and inclusion of mental health people. And we are also a use space for having artists at work in Palais de Tokyo. We offer some studio residency programs. And it's not to be so generous, because we need that. We need to have life, and it brings a lot to us. Because as it is said in permaculture, if you want to be living spaces or living bodies, you have to welcome life, which already exists outside. The third tenet of permaculture is local network, which is an interesting aspect, because Palais Tokyo has been, in the last years, very much about like globalization and international. And we are international, but maybe we were not aware enough of our local network. So we do a lot of local network. It doesn't mean that we are showing only French artists or local artists, but even when we bring international artists or international projects, we always think at what they are doing here. We can plant like international plants in our garden, but they have to, like said in permaculture, to have a sense in the garden, to have a meaning there. That is why, for example, I did this project called Short Circuit, International Short Circuit, or International, short locality. For example, we made a carte blanche to an international curator, Naomi Beckwith, and she will curate our next big season in October. But I invited her saying, what do you want to plant in our garden? And she has this project of working on the reception of French thinking, literature, poetry, and philosophy on American art. So I think it's very interesting to have this vision, especially here in Palais de Tokyo. So this question of local network means also about always thinking that we are part of a context. We are not rootless in whatever we show at Palais de Tokyo. And the last tenet of this is the question of diversity, biodiversity. It is very important. I think in all our institutions, we have been following some canons of a certain linear art history, from modernity to contemporary art, which has put aside a lot of other disciplines, a lot of other aesthetics that it's high time to go back to or to show in the question of diversity. So I just see you an American artist we are showing at Palais Tokyo, Ramelzi, who has his first main exhibition in Europe that is nowadays in Palais Tokyo. And for example, those aesthetics coming more from urban art or street art had not a lot of spaces, I mean, especially in Paris. So I think it's high time that we also open our mind and our eyes also to other aesthetics. So now when I said that, it is 3 years, so I wrote this institutional permaculture book, and some people made fun of me about, okay, it's just a nice way of speculating, but what are you going to do? And I took the risk to publish it before doing. So now there is a lot of things that we've done, a lot of application from, we changed a lot of our schedule, our times of exhibition, we changed our communication, which is totally black and white, for example. We changed our managing process, we changed a lot of things inside, and of course, not to talk about all the general reduction of a carbon print on our transportation and production and so on. So I'm not going to go into this, maybe just to show you some idea. For example, intellectual compost is something that we are doing, like trying to share with the audience all the process of the research that cannot find a place in the exhibitions. It is nowadays in Palais Tokyo, we have an entire exhibition just of all the images that were not being in the show, but that helped to the research, for example, or the Breaking the Spell project, inspired by psychotherapy institutionnelle, about working on the institution, the traumas, how to heal the institution from the inside. But just maybe something that, because you asked for a concrete example, so one concrete example that we had to face is a climatic adaptation we had to do. in Palais de Tokyo, we have a beautiful space which is called La Verrière. It's under a glass roof, very beautiful space, the main space of Palais de Tokyo, which is because of the climate change a total nightmare in the summer, and it's too hot. So I didn't want to make climatization on it because it will be a total absurdity to use energy and to for this space. So I took the example of permaculture, who says that you have not to resist or to fight against nature, but you have to adapt to nature. So we did a project the first summer when I was there to change the spaces, meaning that we closed these main spaces and we had this underground space more fresh to have this exhibition of Laura Lamiel, who was very happy because the surface is the same, but it's another space that is very very rarely used. And it was for me a very intense experience. We didn't lose, but we gained. And the next summer, this summer, we are doing a show with Vivian Sutter, and we are using something that has not been done in Palais Tokyo. We can open here all the glass roof, and it will be the air will be coming inside. So it will be a kind of natural climatization, which is a real challenge, I can tell you, for the insurance, the artists, the collectors, and the lenders. They all accepted. So I'm very happy that the life will come symbolically, but also physically inside. Thank you very much.
Stefanie?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jill and Megan and Kate and the entire team at EXPO for inviting me here. It's such a pleasure to be here. And it's wonderful also to be with such fantastic panelists in conversation today at a moment where I think conversations around institutions and how we can continue to serve artists and the communities and also the environments which sustain us are super important. Swiss Institute is a mid-sized nonprofit which was founded in 1986 by Swiss artists and patrons in New York City. It started out as a very small institution in somebody's home. In the beginning, it was indeed called Swiss Home. And it has grown and grown ever since. And now, since 2018, we are on a corner building with 3 floors and a beautiful rooftop terrace on St. Mark's Place in the East Village. We organize about 6 exhibitions a year with international artists, some Swiss, some not, also artists from New York and from the United States. We organize artist in residency programs, education initiatives, public programs, publications, and everything is free of charge to the public to attend. And our focus has always been artist-centered, which is a legacy that I'm continuing at Swiss Institute. When I first started in 2022, I asked what the institution needs and what a smaller institution of the scale of Swiss Institute can do at this moment and how we can inspire change and also lead the way in a very small manner and by example. I always say that the processes that we're engaging in are urgent and nonetheless also imperfect. So there's a certain need to acknowledge that there are certain contradictions and that there are certain challenges that we are not able to fully overcome at this moment. And nonetheless, I developed a strategic plan together with the team that we call our evolving ecology. So it's also thinking similarly to we discussed before, all of the conversations that are happening in the institution together. So we think about our programming, our audiences, board relations and governance and the team, and also the future of the institution together. We do all of the very pragmatic, very boring work that is nonetheless super important of analyzing our CO2 footprint and working on reducing that. We're looking at transport, at materials, energy, waste, etc. And at the same time, we're inviting artists into the conversation, asking them to really lead forward the conversation in the institution. And that's what I'm speaking about today. With the exhibition Spora, which inaugurated 2 years ago and which is continuing to unfold slowly throughout the entire institution, we invited artists to engage in what I think of as institutional critique from an environmental perspective. but thinking about the environment not only in terms of nature or that thing that we consider nature as separate from culture, but really thinking about it at the intersection of questions of technology, social issues, etc. And so we asked artists to interfere with the processes of the institution. What you see here is a sculpture and also a compost that the artist Jenna Sutella made for us, inspired by a figure from the Muppet universe from Fraggle Rock, which some of you might remember. There's a trash pile called Marjorie, who is a matronly figure who, because all the trash or all the compost is deposited in Marjorie, she has access to people's information. And so in the TV show, she is an oracle. And so Jenna made the sculpture for us into which we as a team deposit our compostables. And the electrochemical or biochemical processes inside generate the energy for a speaker. So it's an earth battery that powers a speaker which is transmitting oracle messages over the rooftop of the institution. So you can hear this compost singing and sort of grunting, and you know when the worms inside are happy and when they're not happy. Another project is with Vivian Suter, who is a Swiss Guatemalan artist who paints in the forest in Guatemala, normally canvases, and proposed to her to make a mural, which was the first time that she ever made a mural. And she's really interested, she doesn't date her painting, so she's really interested in having nature interfere with the processes in the painting, so sunlight, rain, and so on. And I proposed to her to create this mural on the building adjacent to ours, and to have the New York City air, rain, pollution, etc. interfere with the mural over time. There's a number of other projects as well, such as an instruction by Helen Mirror, or Handel Mirror, where whenever we exchange any of the artworks in the interstitial spaces of the gallery, we're not allowed to use new paint, but only leftover paint. So you can now see these different colors of paint in the staircases, and you see our commitment to becoming more sustainable take over the building. And I love that sometimes when people come to the building, they wonder what's going on at Swiss Institute, it's falling into decay, or what's up with the walls, but I actually really enjoy that this commitment is visible to the public. And here's a number of other projects as well, which I won't go so much into detail on. Last year, we organized an exhibition titled Energies, and this continued the project of Spora in the neighborhood. So inspired by a piece of East Village history from the 1970s, we did a long research where we assembled the archive of a fantastic, really important story that has largely been forgotten, where in the 70s, on East 11th Street, very close to where we're located, a group of people installed solar panels and a wind turbine on the roof of their torched building and refurbished it. They generated their own electricity and fed surplus energy back into the Con Edison grid. Con Ed didn't love that, sued them, and the group got help from a former Attorney General of the US and unexpectedly won the lawsuit. This went all the way to Congress and actually helped generate a Public Utilities Regulatory Act in 1978. And this changed energy regulations in the entire country. And so we tracked down everyone we could find from that time who's still around, interviewed them, and then brought in 19 artists, most of them contemporary, and from different parts of the world, to create work with regard to energy and the role of community, and really looking at the small steps that can have a huge effect. Here's a work by Vibeke Massini, which is a battery powered with the energy derived from when confiscated drugs, such as cocaine, are burned in the ports of the Netherlands, and the energy that is derived from that is filled into a battery, which then powered a nebulizer emitting the scent of ozone into the space. Here are some drawings of energy trees by Gordon Matta Clark, and as part of the project, we replanted a rose bush that he had planted in the mid-70s in the yard of St. Mark's Church on a Bowery. So it was a beautiful, very humble gesture of replanting this rose bush, of which the enclosure was still there, but the bush was no longer there. And we collaborated with numerous partners in the neighborhood as well, with the Lower East Side Ecology Center, Loizaida Center, which is a Puerto Rican community center, and a number of others. And a solar panel by Harun Mirza on the rooftop. created the electricity for another artwork by Ash Arter in the exhibition. So it was really this idea of sharing energy, which was transcending the entire exhibition as well. And at the site of the original wind turbine, we asked the community living there what they would like out of this exhibition, because we wanted to include their voices as well. And they asked us for an artwork, and so we commissioned the artist Audubon Nkanga to make a mural which will stay on long-term view in the neighborhood. And we're continuing this work also next year with an exhibition, again inspired by a piece of history from the neighborhood, thinking very locally but connecting to global questions as well. This is a photo from a project that the artist and filmmaker Bud Wirtschafter did between 1967 and 1969, where he handed 16mm cameras to people in the neighborhood to self-represent at a time when people didn't have access to cameras. And then the films were projected onto walls in the neighborhood and bed linen, bed sheets that local laundromats donated. And so we're recreating a new version of this exhibition with contemporary artists and with various partners in the neighborhood next year. Thank you.
Thank you all. You know, it struck me, I know we talked a bit about your presentations, but in hearing you outline them, this kind of through line of ecology and ecosystems and this sort of thinking of institutions as an organism is so especially apparent in Guillaume and Stefanie, your presentations, but I think with Lara Caroline, thinking about you as planting seeds in the community and nurturing and building. So I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about, like, you know, to me it's this, you are in a way these gardeners who are very intentionally thinking futuristically through this lens of this metaphor of strengthening your soil in order to have a stronger crop, so to speak. And so how do you see this? You know, you are sharing with us as this panel is about new initiatives, right? So fast forward a couple of years, what do you see comes of, you know, planting your gardens in this way?
After 3 years, first thing I could say is that it's not easy. There is a lot of difficulties, not because of the people, even if all the people are more or less in favor, which is the case in Palais de Tokyo, where when I proposed this project of institutional permacultures, I mean, a majority of the team were already very much into that. But then it's about how the structure is done, how it functions, that makes a lot of difficulties or obstacles to achieve it. So for me, what I have in mind, I would say that you have to be very humble, humility coming from humus, which comes from the earth, by the way. You have to be to have a lot of humility, which is not easy, especially in the arts, and especially when you were before independent curator. Also, something that you have to learn, which is not easy, especially for me, is to take time to do the thing, to accept that it cannot be overnight, to accept the contradictions of what you're doing. And this is a very good lesson for me, permaculture. I hired for a session of workshop a real permaculture person who is in special permaculture to have workshop with all the teams of Palais Tokyo to see how is it possible to adapt permaculture into this institution, very urban and very... And then one of the conclusions of it was that you have it is said that the permaculture effects, when you do a real permaculture effect in a garden, in nature, you see the first signs after 10 years. So my contract at Palais Tokyo being only 5 years, by the way, so it means that I have already to think about the future of this project and the possible reversibility of it. So you have to take time, you have to accept that, but in a way, what encourages me that I deeply feel that we have not choice, actually, because I think that if you, this ecology emergency, ecological emergency is here already. So, I mean, there is no other choice, or if not, it's depressing. If you don't do anything, I think it's totally depressing. So the two aspects of it, I would say the practical aspect of what you're doing, and the intellectual aspect, which is this like almost theoretical or poetical or utopian thing, must go together, meaning that if you want to do permaculture, if you want to do something, for example, doing a less carbon print or ecological without the storytelling, it's totally depressing because you are not going to change the course of the world with your project. So that's why you need this utopian thing. And on the contrary, if you just have the theoretical without the practice, it's very cynical. So I think you have to have the two. But for me, I cannot help being very optimistic. I don't know why, but because I really think that you gain a lot, finally. It's not about frustration. It's not about forbidding yourself to do things. It's not about to do less. In a way, it's to do more, much more, but much more with intensity. And in a way, it's going back to my first job, was curating, was taking care about the etymology of curating. So it's also taking care of you, of the artist, of the art, of the audience, and of the institution.
I agree with the concept of time as being a really key part of that, and that planting those seeds takes a long time to have them kind of germinate. In the case of the Learning Studio, because what we are thinking about is this intergenerational exchange, it is also about how our audiences are changing who we are and kind of how we operate. I mean, we've had conversations about what it might mean to have high schoolers sit in the museum and help us write the job description for the next educator. We've had conversations about what it means to have like a Grandparents and Special Friends Day, where students are bringing their families to the museum, and it develops this very different sense of ownership over your institution. And I think that's what we're wanting, is to kind of decrease that distance between the incredible work that our artists in Chicago and beyond are doing to how that plays out in everyday life and the questions that people across our city and across our globe are thinking about on a regular basis. And really kind of giving audiences, students, families, people a much deeper understanding that they have an agency to be able to shape contemporary culture in ways that I don't think general public necessarily knows or understands yet. And I think a lot of that is kind of helping to build the relationship and kind of tease that out a little bit so that they can begin to kind of take ownership over that as well.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I came to think of two terms that I think for us are really defining. One is sustainability, and the original meaning of the work or of the word to sustain or to hold up, and it goes both ways. It's the communities and the artists and the audiences who hold us up as an institution, and to whom we also have a commitment of holding them up or continuing to support them through the work that we do. And the other is responsibility, and actually in the term or in the way that people like Donna Haraway or Karen Barat spell it, which is responsibility. So being responsive to what is happening around us and in our world, and being responsible and enabling and facilitating those that are in our surroundings. So this is the local, or why we're doing so much work locally in the neighborhood and really inspired by what is going on around us, but then also thinking about very international connections, because this is in the DNA of the institution of being internationalist, which I believe is also so important, especially at this moment, to continue international dialogue and to continue dialogue throughout. And the time aspect comes in as well, you know, looking back in time and at what has been happening in the neighborhood and throughout history, and also through other ways of knowing that are have not been acknowledged as much. and to combine those with artists working today or with a future-facing vision and mission of the institution.
Thank you. I love this whole conversation of museums and as sort of generative forces, you know, that really are with this sort of ecosystem of participation, almost as if like you are drawing from the resources and the energy of the communities and the environments in which you live, but also you are the gardeners and you are shaping it as well. So it's this sort of iterative process. And I think for, maybe speaking for myself, it is encouraging, you know, to think about institutions as a place that can build for the future. But staying with our nature metaphors, you know, there are times when we weather really tough storms, and perhaps we are in this moment where there are, you know, disruptive forces that, you know, crops are, you know, struck down, or, you know, it's a season where locusts come more, you know, and I don't want to get too biblical here, but I guess my question here is, you know, you as, you know, this is a panel about leadership. And so as leaders, weathering storms and being gardeners, if we're sticking with that metaphor, how are you tending to yourselves? And how do you, what centers you? What keeps you resilient? And is solidarity an answer? I mean, if you could each speak to that.
I think that, you know, being here together, having this moment with colleagues and friends to be in conversation is really, really valuable. I think we are all learning, and we always continue to learn, including at this moment. So I don't think any of us have any definitive answer, nor is there perhaps one. But for me, what's always important is to also to go back to artists and to look at what artists are doing, as maybe you also gauged from the from what I presented. That's how I think and live, both as an individual and as a curator, and as a director of an institution in my role as a, you know, leader of an institution as well. And I think, again, looking at how artists work and how they work today, but also historically, and looking at various contexts in which they have had to navigate challenging moments can be really instructive and inspiring and give us strength at this moment.
I think there's, being a leader in this moment means that we're also kind of balancing being really brave and taking risks, while also ensuring that we're protecting staff and we're protecting our artists, which can be a tricky thing. And I think one of the ways that I have continually thought about it is that it is a constant conversation between all of our staff, in that I very much want to ensure, for like instances like this, that if I am taking a really brave stance on things, that I am doing that with the good graces of the rest of our staff. And it is ensuring that kind of like health and protection in the projects that we're doing that's important. And I think that also goes into really kind of, I think having historically sat in museums, I have so many colleagues and friends that have become so burnt out and so exhausted. And I think moving forward, it is a manner not only of organizational, but also self-preservation, because there is so much happening simultaneously. It is about kind of sitting with where your line is, and taking into account how you build that into what your projects look like at your organization, and ensuring that you can adjust to scale as necessary based on where everybody's sitting. I mean, I would rather have a team that is incredibly excited and energized doing a smaller scale of work than having a team that is burnt out, ready to quit, and over it, doing a million things at once, though we are doing a million things at once. But I think just being able to balance that like bravery and that risk taking, which is a major part of the arts. I mean, we don't exist without artists that have taken risks. Balancing that with how we're thinking about care for ourselves and for all of those interdependent parts of our organization.
Thank you, Guillaume, Lara, Caroline, Stefanie. Your sharing has been, I don't know, for me, very inspiring listening to you, and I feel like we're in very good hands with this generation of leadership, and I'm sure you all want to agree with me, so thank you very much.